Hi guys, I've got a fun page in my traveler's notebook today for you as part of the Feed Your Craft design team. Now I had this sort of landscape photo of a sunrise, and if you're sensing a theme of this week's videos, yes, it's another photo of a sunrise, and I printed it so that it would be the full width of my traveler's notebook, because I'm printing it the full width, it's only going to be, it's sort of roughly about half the height of the page. The way I printed this was just to print two 4x6 photos. I used two 4x6 photos to print my landscape photo, and if you don't know how I do that, I do it with Photoshop, and I will leave a link up here to a video of how I do that. Now, one of the reasons I do that is because I don't like having photos that run across the width of my book. I want to have that little gap down the middle of it so that the book bends easy enough. So there's no point in printing one whole long photo using some bigger photo paper. It's easy enough just to do it on 4x6s. Now at the start of the page, I'm going to use the Aster Alpha from Brandy Kincaid and Feed Your Craft to write a quote up here, or stamp a quote up here. And as you can see, I didn't just jump straight in and start stamping this week. I wanted to make sure that the quote would actually fit because it was a little bit longer than usual, and I just wanted to make sure that it was going to fit in there and I wasn't going to get to the end of it and have to start stamping elsewhere. So I just roughly stamped that out on some scrap paper, and then I did end up chopping up the stamping so that I could move the words around to work out how it's best going to fit on here. And I got that into 4 lines that do actually fit in this top half of my notebook here. Now, because I've ended up with 4 lines, I figured what would I do with this white space to split it into 4. I could have just used one pattern paper and stuck that down and just ruled some lines to do my stamping. With 4 lines like that, I do want to try and get it a little bit straight, but instead I decided that I would create a kind of ombre effect with some pattern paper. The sunrise obviously has a little bit of pretty sort of pink and orange in it, but the photo is predominantly blue. So I went through my stash and I pulled out some blue papers. I pulled out a whole bunch of blue papers, and you would have seen me sorting those into well, obviously I only need 4. I pulled out way more than 4 just to hold them against my photo. There's a lot of different blues, and I wanted to make sure that all of those blues worked nicely with the photo. So you can see I've got a few, I had a few 6x6 papers and also a few of these older 6x4 papers, and most of those are from Studio Calico, sort of older kits from there. So I really did just shop my stash for this, pick out a bunch of papers. Now, none of these papers are the full width of a traveler's notebook. They're only 6 inches wide, which is why you see me cutting 2 strips of each paper, because I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the photo with these background papers. I am going to split them in the middle, so I didn't actually need a pattern paper that was the full width of my notebook. I was going to have a split down the middle anyway, so this was a good opportunity to use up some of those 6-inch papers that aren't quite big enough to fit into a notebook like this. So after I've cut 2 strips of each paper, I am just gluing them into my notebook. I didn't worry about trimming down the edge so that they're the right width. I literally am just going to stick them in, then flip the page over and trim it all down with my scissors the same way that I did with my photo. I always make sure that I print my photos a little bit larger than what I need to make sure that they are going to fit into the notebook. So that's exactly what I'm doing with these papers too. Apart from running out of tape runner again, I had a really crafty weekend this weekend, like super crafty. I went through like 3 tape runners, so it's terrible, terrible. It's definitely my most used crafty tool has to be a tape runner. I go through so many of them. So I'm just lining these up against the photos that I've already stuck down on the bottom and just leaving the same size gap through the middle. So the gap kind of becomes less obvious as the page fills up. It looks quite obvious down the middle of the photo, but once you put all your papers in and start doing your stamping, it's not really an issue. Now this notebook isn't quite straight at the top, so my trimming of the strips didn't quite work. There's a little bit of a gap at the top, but like I said, once you start stamping and filling up the page, you don't even notice these sorts of things. So I've got my little guide here so that I can see which alpha to stamp where the words are going to go. And I did just wonder though about stamping with my Memento Tuxedo black ink onto the pattern paper. So I'm going to do a test first, and I'm really glad that I did, and you'll see why in just a second. I pulled out my VersaFine ink, which I know is a super black ink, probably the blackest ink that I've got. I don't often use it because it does take a while to dry, but you can see the difference here even from far away, but I'll show you up close. You can see the difference in the blackness of the inks there. So I'm glad I did the test. I would have been disappointed if I had started stamping in that Memento ink and then had to redo it again. So I'm going to use the VersaFine, and I'm going to just be very careful not to smudge anything. Now usually when I'm stamping like this, I'm not particularly concerned about keeping my stamps clean, but you will see me here. I am cleaning each stamp after each time I use it. I'm trying to keep things as clean as possible, and I've got my lawn fawn stamp chamois there, just cleaning the stamp off, and the VersaFine ink does clean off very well. It doesn't stain your stamps like stays on would. When I'm using that Memento Tuxedo black, I definitely don't worry about cleaning my stamps as much because it pretty much transfers all the ink onto the paper at the time. If anything, I just do a sort of stamp off with it. So this is a slightly longer process, but not probably as long as you'd think. So I am going to just speed it up a little bit for you, but you can see why I chose to do the stripes of pattern paper rather than having one. It, as well as adding a bit of colour to the page, which it does, I didn't want it just to be all white at the top there. It gives me a really, really easy guideline for where to stamp. So it's really easy to get the words straight on here. If you've seen me stamping before, you'll know that stamping straight, especially words like this, is something that I super struggle with. So this was an interesting way to go about it. I did try very hard to place the words so that there weren't going to be any letters overlapping that gap down the middle. I didn't quite get there. I did have to put a T across it, and you can see there is a little gap there. I tried to fill it in with a pen, but that didn't work too great, so I'm deciding just to live with it as it is. Now, like I said, this is the Aster Alpha from Brandy Kincaid and Feed Your Craft. I really love it. If you've seen Brandy's work and ever wanted her handwriting on your spreads, then this is the Alpha for you. I will leave a link to the Feed Your Craft store down below in the description box because this Alpha is still available and it is one of my favorites. You can see how cute it looks, especially with that big sort of blockiness to it. It's perfect for these sorts of quotes. And here we go. Here's the point of this quote here, the magic of beginnings, which I thought applied really nicely to my sunrise photo. Each day is definitely a new beginning and has new possibilities to it. So that was my purpose for this quote. I think it's worth getting up super early in the morning to get a sunrise picture like this and spend a little time planning out how the beginning of this day is going to go. So there's my little quote here. I've just finished it off with a punctuation, a little full stop, which I love. There is a matching set for this Alpha that's got numerals in it, which is something else I love. You know, I love a stamp set with a number. Didn't actually need them for this spread, but that's also an advantage. Now this is quite a busy page visually, I think, but I did want to put in the author of the quote, which is, I'm going to butcher this too, Meister Eckhart. So I'm using these really cute little puffy alphas from Feed Your Craft as well, just in a really matching blue down the bottom here. It kind of hides it down the bottom, which I didn't want it to visually take up too much room, so I like that there. And I've also got some of these really cute puffy stickers. There's all sorts of shapes on there, but I'm going to use those crosses because they are my favorite, and just sprinkle a few of those across the page as well. I'm using the yellow and the pink ones just to bring a little bit of those colors from the photo up to the top of my layout. Stop it becoming a little bit too blue there. Just adds a nice balance of color to the page. And then that is this page all done. I love how this page turned out, and I love adding quotes to my traveler's notebooks. So this strip of paper as a stamping guide thing really worked out nicely. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you want to keep watching, there's a couple more videos on screen, or why not check out my Patreon page because there are even more videos over there. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!